If I asked you to name the world's most powerful entities, you'd probably list countries like the United States and China. But what if I told you that in 2025, a single company, Apple, had a greater market capitalization than the combined GDP of all of Africa? In fact, five companies, Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, Alphabet Google, and Saudi Aramco, have market capitalizations that would rank them among the 10 wealthiest countries in the world. So here's the question. Is Apple just a company, or is it something closer to a geopolitical actor? And given the vast resources, global reach, and policy influence of these firms, we have to ask, who really holds the power in global politics today?
So, what exactly is a multinational corporation or an MNC? Simply put, a multinational corporation is a for profit company that operates in more than one country. It typically has headquarters in one country but maintains supply chains, factories, offices, or subsidiaries across multiple national borders. Companies like Apple, Nestle, Toyota, Pfizer are all MNCs. They do business on a truly global scale. While some define transnational corporations as more globally integrated and less tied to one home country, we'll use multinational broadly to refer to any firm operating across borders with global influence on a global scale. But MNCs aren't just economic actors. They're increasingly seen as political actors with the ability to shape decisions at both the domestic and the international levels. That influence comes from several key sources. They're massive economies of scale. Some have revenues larger than entire countries' GDPs. Their global mobility, they can shift production, capital, and operations with ease. Their influence over governments through lobbying and partnership, and their control over global supply chains, giving them leverage over labor markets, trade flows, and even environmental standards. When you put these factors together, you get an actor that isn't just an economic player, it's a political force. MNCs help write the rules of the global economy, shape domestic policy, and influence international relations. Think of your smartphone. The rare earth minerals were likely mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Rwanda. The microchips fabricated in Taiwan using machines built in the Netherlands. The software was coded in California and the device was assembled in India or China. An MNC like Apple doesn't just sell the final product. It architects and controls the entire global process, giving it power over the economies of multiple countries at once. And unlike states, they don't answer to voters. Their power is not based on borders or elections, but on capital, contracts, and control over production. So, why do multinational corporations matter in international relations? The answer is simple. They have the resources, mobility, and influence to shape global outcomes, sometimes more effectively than states. When Apple negotiates with China over data privacy, or ExxonMobil helps draft energy policy in the United States, these aren't just business decisions, they're political choices with global consequences. MNCs exercise power in global politics through a variety of channels. First, MNCs often serve as gatekeepers of investment. Where they choose to build factories or extract resources can dramatically impact a country's economy, especially in the developing world. Governments, in turn, compete fiercely for investment, often offering tax breaks, regulatory exemptions, or weakened labor laws to attract it. This gives corporations immense leverage to influence domestic policy before a single dollar is spent. Second, MNCs spend billions to influence domestic and international law. Through lobbying, campaign contributions, and private meetings with officials, they shape policy on everything from corporate tax rates to climate agreements. This influence extends beyond borders as corporations regularly participate in global summits and help write the rules in venues like the World Trade Organization, ensuring the global economy works in their favor. Third, MNCs organize production across vast transnational supply chains. This gives them incredible influence over labor practices, environmental standards, and global trade flows. By choosing where to source materials and manufacture goods, corporations can reward or punish countries based on their policies, shifting entire industries from one nation to another without ever making a formal political statement. Finally, in complex areas like technology and climate, corporations don't just respond to regulations, they often help create it, and sometimes even without public input. Through public private partnerships and technical standard setting bodies, tech firms like Meta and Google help write governance guidelines for AI that states later adopt. They're shaping what counts as ethical or sustainable in the global arena. Together, these mechanisms show that MNCs are not just passive players in a system run by governments. They're actively shaping the rules themselves. They've become de facto political actors in the international system. To really understand how multinational corporations shape global politics, it's helpful to briefly consider a few specific cases, situations where corporate decisions or behavior had clear political consequences. As we've already noted, Apple is one of the most profitable and visible multinational corporations in the world, but it's also one of the most politically influential. Apple's products are assembled in China, rely on rare earth minerals mined in Africa, use semiconductors from Taiwan, and are sold in markets across the globe. Its supply chain decisions can affect labor standards, environmental conditions, and trade policy. For example, Apple has faced criticism for sourcing components from factories accused of labor violations, including poor working conditions and forced overtime. In 2020, it was one of several firms pressured to account for potential links to forced labor in Xinjiang, China, putting it at the center of a global geopolitical human rights controversy. At the same time, Apple's compliance with data privacy laws in the European Union and its relationship with Chinese regulators illustrate how MNCs must navigate and sometimes influence very different political systems to protect their interests. In Nigeria, the oil giant Shell has operated for decades, extracting billions of dollars worth of oil from the Niger Delta. But its presence has been marked by major controversy. Shell has been accused of contributing to oil spills, environmental degradation, and destruction of local livelihoods. It's also faced allegations of complicity in human rights abuses, including security crackdowns against protesters and activists. In this case, the Nigerian state relied heavily on Shell for revenue, giving the company enormous influence over both local policy and enforcement. This is a powerful example of how MNCs can operate in weak or dependent states with limited oversight, raising serious questions about sovereignty and corporate accountability. And the COVID-19 pandemic revealed just how powerful pharmaceutical companies can be, not only in science, but in diplomacy. During the COVID crisis, companies like Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca developed and distributed life-saving vaccines at a record speed. But their distribution was shaped less by global health needs than by market access, patents, and state corporate negotiations. The influence of these companies extended far beyond the lab. They negotiated directly with governments, sometimes withholding supply based on pricing or patent disputes. They lobbied against temporary waivers on intellectual property rights, even as developing countries and global health organizations called for wider access. And as a result, many low and middle income countries waited months or even years longer to access vaccines. Critics described this as vaccine apartheid, a situation where corporate control over production and patents shaped global health outcomes more than intergovernmental agreements or international aid. These three brief examples show how MNCs can influence policy directly, undermine or enhance state sovereignty, affect human rights and environmental conditions, and even shape how and where people live, work, and survive. In short, multinational corporations don't just respond to global politics, they're actively creating it. While multinational corporations are powerful players in global politics, their influence is often controversial. Indeed, many of the same features that make MNCs influential, size, mobility, and resources, also make them difficult to regulate, ethically complex, and in some cases, deeply problematic for democratic governance. Let's explore four key areas of criticism. MNCs are not elected, yet they shape laws, labor markets, and even international norms. Unlike states, they're accountable to shareholders and corporate boards, not to citizens, which means their decisions are often driven by profit, not the public interest. This raises fundamental questions. Who holds these corporations accountable? What happens when their interests conflict with those of the communities they operate in? MNCs can also use their mobility as leverage, choosing to invest in countries with weak labor laws, low taxes, or minimal environmental oversight. This strategy, known as regulatory arbitrage, puts pressure on governments to lower their standards to attract business, incentivizes them to lower their own protections to remain business friendly. This is often framed as a race to the bottom, where states compete for investment by undermining their own regulatory protections. Critics often argue that MNCs exploit workers in the global south, externalize environmental costs, and worsen economic inequality. Their supply chains may be linked to child labor, land grabs, or climate damage, often without consequence because the corporation is several steps removed from the harm. This reinforces global power imbalances where profits are globalized but harm is localized, especially in already vulnerable communities. Finally, MNCs wield enormous influence over public policy, often through lobbying, campaign financing, or participation in regulatory bodies. In some countries, this has led to concerns about corporate capture, where laws and regulations are written by or for corporate interests. This undermines democratic accountability and skews political systems in favor of those who already have the most power. These critiques don't mean that all MNCs are necessarily harmful, but they do remind us that power in global politics is not always visible or accountable. And they raise questions about how we govern private actors who operate on a truly global scale and who often operate outside the reach of any single state. But how you assess these impacts and how you weigh the costs and benefits of MNCs sometimes depends on the theoretical framework you're drawing on. From a liberal perspective, MNCs are often seen as agents of cooperation. They connect markets, promote trade, and build economic interdependence between states, reducing the likelihood of conflict. In this view, the rise of global capitalism, driven by corporate networks, is a positive sum game that can create shared prosperity and even peace. But liberals also acknowledge the need for rules, institutions, and regulations to ensure that corporate power aligns with public interests. Marxists and critical political economy scholars take a much more critical view. They argue that MNCs are vehicles of capitalist domination, serving the interests of elites in the global north while extracting wealth and labor from the global south. In this framework, MNCs reinforce global inequality, limit sovereignty, and ensure that profits remain concentrated in the hands of multinational owners and shareholders. From this view, MNCs are not just economic actors, they're political forces that help maintain an unequal global order. Constructivists focus less on material power and more on how MNCs help shape norms, identities, and global discourse. Corporations don't just make products, they tell stories about values, responsibility, and what counts as legitimate behavior. Think about corporate branding around sustainability, diversity, or social impact. These messages shape how we think about ethics, rights, and even governance. Nike's Just Do It campaign or Unilever's sustainability branding aren't just about selling, they shape global norms around gender, environment, and personal identity. Indeed, the concept of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, the very idea that corporations should be judged by their ethical and environmental impact, not just their profits, is a powerful norm. MNCs, by adopting and promoting CSR through their marketing and reporting, aren't just complying with rules, they're actively shaping the global conversation about what it means to be a good corporate actor. From this perspective, MNCs are norm entrepreneurs, helping define what is appropriate or acceptable in a globalized world. Each of these theories offers a different lens, and while no single perspective captures everything, together they help us understand why multinational corporations matter, not just economically, but politically and ideationally as well.
Multinational corporations may not command armies or sit in the United Nations, but their decisions shape where we work, what we consume, how we communicate, and even how states behave. They build infrastructure, supply chains, influence regulation, and promote global norms. In many ways, they've become de facto political actors, whether we acknowledge it or not.